Lindsay, I'd really like to thank you for offering to do this presentation, and a very special thank you to Katie, who's along here to support as well, and Rob. Actually, that's Lindsay and Katie's son. Lindsay's a pretty unique guy, as I think most of you know. For over 70 years, he has been involved with design, engineering, manufacture, racing, speed trials, and all through that time he's been manufacturing an incredible quantity of stuff. The other week I was visiting Lindsay and he said, I don't know anyone that's like me, that's had a life like I've had. Absolutely crazy. The amount of manufacturing that I have done is just incredible. And to give you an idea of just what he's done, he's manufactured 52 sidecars, racing sidecars, just under 40 solo bikes, and these are when we manufacturers from the ground up. He invented the 10-inch wheeled sidecar that really lowered the centre of gravity and significantly improved the performance of the racing sidecars. He did a prototype of the BMW GS motorcycle. A few years later it was went into production after further development in Europe. He has built numerous bikes from the bottom up. The Tempolanzanis, the 1922, very, very special and sophisticated fast machines. The Indian Altoonas, the 1915-16 Indian. So his manufacturing side has been absolutely incredible. Now what Lindsay can do, which very few people can, is that he not only designs the bikes and the complete unit. So if you come to a sidecar, he will design the complete unit. He can build the race engine. So he's designing, building, racing, and then going back and optimising it. And as a result, he's had some incredible racing wins. So he's had 11 Australian Grand Prix and Australian TT Championship wins on a sidecar. In 2006, if I get it correct, he was Australian champion, historic sidecar. He built the engine for Peter Arundel's Altoona that got a speed record on Lake Garden there of 256 kilometres an hour, if I'm correct. And honestly, this goes on and on. Not only did he do that, he spent a year in Europe racing, and while he was there, he was racing with another Australian, Ray Foster, who was his passenger. They did about 17 races in Europe. The best they did in the major races was fourth in Nuremberg TT, I think it was, and fourth in the Holland Grand Prix, something like that. So he was right up there. But these guys were racing a Norton Manx that they took from Australia, and they were competing against the BMW race teams. They did pretty well also on the smaller circuits where they were getting a lot of thirds and fourths, but they were really competing with something where the technology was just so much better, and it was really the skill and the ability that Lindsay had to extract everything he could out of his engines that really, and his racing, that really allowed that to happen. So we have, and Lindsay did all this basically without a lot of sponsorship, especially in the early days. I think he got some in the later days, but it's not like he was part of a racing team that had lots of money thrown out of it. So he had to improvise, he had to make things, his can-do attitude, he was willing to experiment, and really became one of the foremost designers of sidecars and performance speed machines engines during that period. Now, Lindsay is absolutely, his passion, I can tell by reading and talking to him that from quite an early age he had an extreme passion for motorcycles and for speed. but he needed the skills. And what happened, he managed through his own initiative partly, but a lot of stars aligned that actually meant that he got the skills that he needed to build some of build the sidecars, but also to build the really high performance race engines. And when I say build, he actually gets the castings made and machines and makes them himself. It's not as if he's farming it out to other people. He does it in what is quite a modest workshop. So I'm going to hand over to Lindsay now for what will be I'm sure a very interesting presentation. He's just going to talk through, and we'll go for about 20 minutes or so before we stop and have question time. So over to you, Lindsay.
Okay, right. I'm a little bit croaky because I've got a bit of a cold coming up, so you'll have to put up with me as I go along. Okay, thanks Linz for the introduction as such. It has been a fascinating life. It's actually 80 years I've been involved with motorbikes. And the way it happened, after the war, back in 1945, my dad, who had been a racer on Super X Excelsiors, around various circuits, including a motordrome, he had a bunch of mates that used to come around talking and all the rest of it. But after the war, they all used to meet down at the Rosstown Hotel in Carnegie. And he used to walk me down there because petrol rationing, no one drove anywhere in those days. And I would sit around listening to all these old buggers talk about pre-war racing when they were really into motorbikes. And so that was 80 years ago. That was when I was first involved, and sat there listening to it all, and it just went on and on. Met up with a couple of the good guys that had been successful racers pre-war, and Dad took me to the first scramble, motocross as they call them now, but scramble in those days, in Oakley in 1947. That was down behind the hotel on in the main road of Oakley on the Warrigal Road, down in the creek there. So that was my first experience of motorbike racing. And I think it was probably the first scramble in Victoria at least, you know. And then a year or so later I went to a road race, and that was at Rowville, in the prisoner of war camp opposite the pub at Rowville. There was a circuit laid out amongst the road there, mostly dirt, but a little bit of bitumen in front of the huts. And so that was my introduction to Rowville and road racing. So I was sort of getting trapped into this situation with motorbikes. Everywhere I went, I was involved with motorbikes. So from there, I wasn't allowed to have a motorbike according to Mum, but that's, I think, the way we all went in those early days. But eventually she found bikes turning up in the backyard, so she must have got a bit of a clue I was going to be in the bikes. In our area in Carnegie, Mimosa Road, Carnegie, we had a nice little road racing circuit around a block of land, and we used to use push bikes around there in our early days. But when I got to about 13 or 14 and I actually got a bike, we used to use that road race around that until the police would come and put us off for another week, and then we'd try again the following week. Things were fairly slack in those days as far as the police was concerned. They would just tell us to go and put a silencer on us, too bloody noise, and that's all that would be involved, you know. So, you know, combined with the push bikes racing, because, well, another strange thing, Oakley Technical School I went to when it first started up in Post Road, Oakley, and the carpentry teacher there was a push bike racer. So he built a what we would call a BMX track out the back of the school, the new school, and we used to race our push bikes around that. So it was all becoming a bit one-sided, the whole event, you know. When I got to about 13, I acquired a couple of bikes. You may remember back in those days, the Age newspaper used to come out, and there would always be heaps and heaps of bikes available. And I used to sort of be first down to the newspaper stand on a Saturday morning, see what was around in our area where I could get to, and usually snaffle one or two bikes. And actually I got trading a fair bit in bikes in those days out of the Age, so that helped with keeping the penny coming along. The best bike I got in the early days was a Big Port AJS I got at Newport Power Station. My foreman said, "Oh, I got a bike at home you can have." By the time I went and saw it, it was just a fantastic thing. It was an ex-factory racer, just a Big Port with all roller bearings inside the thing. No bushes, just a beautiful motor and all the rest of it. And I brought that home in the train from Newport to Carnegie, which you could do in the guard's van in the old days. And that was my race bike for quite a good period of time, except that that was the first bike that I actually pulled apart completely just to see how it all sort of worked. And I finished up causing it major disaster because I didn't tighten up the big end nut on the thing, and it split the crankcase. The big end split the firewheels and split the craces, so that was the end of that. But that was in, I was about 13 or 14 then, sort of creeping along, buying bikes, racing them around paddocks everywhere. And as we sort of get up towards the licensing age, I think at 17, I bought a Velocet KSS Velo. Terrific bike. I used that for a lot of years going backwards and forwards to work. It had been used as a clubman racer, so it had a clean through muffler and open exhaust, as it were, low handlebars and no kickstarter. And that's the bike I took to get my licence at the exhibition buildings. Used to be the place where you went in those days, controlled by the police for the licensing test and all the rest of it. And I turned up with this thing. My car licence on the same day. My grandfather took a car in for me, and the same policeman did the car and bike licence. And he came out and he said, what's this about? You can't ride that. And I said, well, that's the only one I got. And he had a WL Harley. That's what they had, the police bikes in those days, Harleys. So I push-started the thing, hell of a noise and all the rest of it. And he followed me around the little track they had for getting the licence, and he came back and he says, well, you shouldn't really be riding it, but you rode it okay, so here's your licence. So, for those casual days again, eh? So I used that KSS for quite a long time for going backwards and forwards to work. And now 18, I could sort of get me competition licence. One of the guys I mentioned earlier at the pub had I think it was about a 37 500 AJ, and he gave it to me, and that became my main scramble bike. I built up a BSA Bantam, which was the go. Everyone had a Bantam in those days, and so I had to build one of those. And I scrambled all that till I was about 20, a couple of years I scrambled that stuff. And then one of the guys at work sort of liked the bike a fair bit, so the Bantam a fair bit, so he swapped me a Thunderbird Triumph for it, 51 Triumph Thunderbird. And the same guy is actually, he was a first aid guy at South Yarra where I was working. So he said, oh, you better come and be my passenger at Fisherman's Bend. So I had a ride on his Triumph as a passenger, and I thought, oh, that's not bad. I should have a ride on the Thunderbird as a solo too. So I stripped that down. Beautiful bike. It was a 51 model, so it wasn't very old. Stripped that down, and I raced it once as a solo. Didn't like that very much and decided to build a sidecar for it. Built up a sidecar and as a scramble bike, and scrambled that for a few years. Reasonable sort of success, but there were some real stars in those days. George Murphy was one of the top riders, Bernie Mac, another one, and I couldn't quite compete with them, but it was all good fun. Anyhow, 1956 comes along, and they decide they're going to open the new track at Phillip Island. I thought, well, that's not a bad thing. Well, I'd give that a try. So we put road tyres on the old scramble bike, and Bob Mitchell, who was an international sidecar racer, came back to Australia. Bernie Mac was the top star of the day. A couple of South Australian guys, Laurie Fox, a couple more westbound from Victoria. So the race was on at 56. I entered the thing, and would you believe I came in third against all these guys on their Manx Nortons. So the old Triumph by that stage I had going pretty well. I was making crankshafts for them and had my own camshaft grinder. So I had it going pretty well, but it was still an old scramble bike after all. And much to my surprise, I got third prize money, but they ran two other classes within the race. They ran novice sidecar for your first ride in the road race, and a push rod class. So the Triumph was a bushrider, of course, against the Manx Nortons. And I think I earned more than the Bob Mitchell won on the day. I think it was something like about £50. I was earning £9 at work. I think about £50, and I thought, this is a caper, this is me, you know. I'm going to be a professional road racer. So Bernie Mac was the top Australian guy at that time, and I used to work in his shop in Carnegie on Saturdays and Sundays, cleaning up the workshop for him. So he encouraged me to, I should get a Manx Norton, that would have to be the way to go. So he had an old, about a 53 Manx Norton, long stroke motor, and we built up a sidecar for it. And I rode that at a couple of meetings until it broke a piston and semi-destroyed the motor. So I put my good Triumph motor in that frame and used that for a year or so. And then Ray Foster, one of my workmates at the SEC, was pretty interested in sort of being passenger, so he became my passenger. And we were talking one day and we thought, why don't we go to Europe? We're going pretty good as on the Triumph, let's go to Europe. So it meant that I had to get a Norton, because it was a 500 class in international racing. So we bought another short stroke motor off Bernie Mac and fitted that up to the bike. Raced that for a year in Victoria in Australia, New South Wales. Excuse me, I'll have a bit of a drink. So in 1958 we decided this is our go, we're off to Europe. I was 21 at the time. Most sidecar racers were senior guys, they'd been at the war. Most of the guys I knew that were racing sidecars were all 30s and 40s and 50s. Here's me as a 21-year-old going to go and, you know, take this caper on. So we booked a passage on the Fair Sky, one of the old ships that used to bring migrants out and be a party boat going back to Europe for Australians going overseas. And so we loaded the bike into that and set off on December 58. Only got as far as Queensland and I met Katie on the boat. So from that point on, she became my manager and chief mechanic, you know, and that's the sort of the way it went, you know. When they say it was a party boat, it was a party boat. It was 24-hour day party all the way to England. So I arrived in England not in very good condition, really. Anyhow, and Katie went to Holland, back to Holland in those days. So in England, a bit of a surprise for me. I'd only come through technical school, hadn't learned a lot about the world, knew about nuts and bolts, and that's about all. And I was just a bit surprised that England was such a different place to Australia. Around London, of course, very smoky, very dirty, very crowded. We had a letter of introduction to go to the AMC factory, who were producing the AJS in Norton, in Woolwich. And I had a letter from Millage Brothers in Melbourne. And so we got a job there straight away. Lived in right next to the factory in a very smoky area because the power station was across the river. And I got a job in the race workshop straight away, which was pretty handy. Jack Williams, ex-TT racer, was the workshop manager, and he seemed to take a bit of a liking to what I was doing, so he gave me a lot of good jobs. I ran the dynamometer for a bit, assembled 7 RAJS race bikes, and that was pretty good. And I was there for about 3 months before the race season was about to start. European racing is a funny situation. You've got to write to all the event organisers, who of course in Germany, France, Italy, whatever. They don't write to you in English, they write to you in their own language. So you have to write to them and try and negotiate a start. And what the idea was that you put to them that you were from Australia, you'd been an Australian champion, and you wanted £50 to start in their race. So they would sort of consider what was sort of going on there. They'd write back to you and say, yeah, they accept you, or they don't. We tried to keep away from the major races, the Grand Prix, because we knew we'd be uncompetitive against the factory BMWs. So we managed to get lots of starts. We got 17 events to run during that year, and most of them paid their £50. it was a very interesting life. We had a Austin van that we lived in, transported the van in. That sort of was our main living. We were like gypsies, really, going around the European circuits, and we had a few good placings, mostly at the minor minis. That was all very good. Racing was pretty serious over there. We had to. The circuits in those days were not like the Grand Prix circuits now. They're all racing mostly, particularly in Germany, through pine forest and so on. One of the East German meetings we went to, that we had 3 people killed in the race. The sidecar behind me ran off the track, ran into the crowd, ran into a tree, killed 2 spectators and his passenger. So that's the sort of way it was. You're racing between, pine trees, pretty well every circuit you went to. So it was fairly hectic in life, but very, very enjoyable. And that sort of, we went through the whole year. Towards the end of the year, when the season was over, I went back to England and worked at a race workshop with a top Norton man, Ray Petty, and learned a lot there about Norton motors, and that was, started me on the right track to head back to Australia. And I decided to get into the BMW side. A brand new Manx Norton was £700 sterling. The best second-hand BMW you could buy was about £3,000. So I just had absolutely no chance of doing that all. So we decided it was best if I go back to Australia and do my thing there, and that would be the way to go. So I arrived back in Australia with the same money I went over there with. So I had a whole year of living as a racer and a gypsy and learning a bit, and it cost me nothing. So that was pretty good. Not even more than I brought Katie back, so that was good too. So that's basically when I get back to Australia. From then on it goes into a whole new event where I sort of got into the Australian racing, the manufacturing side, and that's something we can talk about one other time, I guess, yeah.
Yeah, look, Lindsay, I'm going to go back a little bit in history because I'm aware that you did an apprenticeship at the SEC, and I'm also aware that you applied for a plumbing apprenticeship. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And luckily somebody saw that you had a little bit more talent or whatever, or you should go in a different direction, and decided you should be a toolmaker. Is that correct?
That's really, yes. Yeah. SEC was very interesting. I started an apprenticeship when I was 15, of course, there at the Richmond workshops. But one of the things they did encourage was, while you're an apprentice, you can do foreigners. Do we know what foreigners are? Yeah. So I thought, well, that's a good caper, if you can spend a bit of your time making bits and pieces for your bikes, that was the way to go. And they had all the machinery in the world, so I got to the stage where I could actually produce crankshafts, machine cylinder heads, and do that all in work time. Was the government or you people paying for it, so that was good.
Title of this presentation was getting the skills to match the passion, and I've done a bit of research and started to write a little bit about Lindsay's story, and I think there were some fairly significant things happened in those early days. At 15, honestly, Lindsay could have been, I think, a plumber, could he?
Yeah.
I mean, imagine that. So, yeah, he could have been good at exhaust. He could have had the best exhausts in the world, but what Lindsay was able to do, there's a little bit more to the story. I'll fill it in because you're losing your voice, and you can add to it. But so Lindsay was accepted and started doing his trade certificate in toolmaking, I think it was. So he was going to night school and doing everything, and had access to obviously one of the best workshops in the country. And if you've got a situation where you've got a great workshop, you've got an inquisitive mind and a real desire to learn like Lindsay did, you've also got a whole group of people, and I think I'm correct here, that you had a lot of workmates who had motorcycles.
Yeah, that's the way
and
it was.
So you had this situation where I guess ideas were exchanged,
True.
And I don't know how many people here at 18 would have even thought about machining a crankshaft. You know, and building race engines, and so he was, you know, racing his and pushing his Triumph engines to the absolute limit. I think you told me you blew a few up because you were over revving them or whatever. But incredible situation, and so a lot of these things happened, which allowed him to do things. You told me about a sign in one of the workshops which said something like, "No bikes allowed in here before 10 o'clock" or something. Was that correct?
Yeah. Well, that was actually the railway workshops at Newport. Vic Chiron was a foreman down there. He was a terrific engine builder, and I used to talk to him a fair bit. But about 10 years ago, I went back to have a look at the Victorian Railway workshops. They've got a museum there now, and the sign is still on the wall that Vic Chiron had on the wall that you're not allowed to bring the bikes in before 10 o'clock in the morning. So the SEC was pretty good for foreigners, but the railway must have been a lot better.
So another thing that really I think influenced Lindsay is your friends, the Rumbles, I think, and forget the name of the other, who were in your street or nearby and were your friends when you were young. We're all interested, I think, in speed and racing.
That's right. Yeah.
And so there was an influence, from that perspective.
Yeah, we're talking about Ken Rumble, who was the best all-rounder we've ever had in Australia. Road racing, scrambled, motocross, short circuit, anything you could think of, he was tops. But he used to live around the corner from where we had our little road racing circuit. So he used to come out and watch us going around and all the rest of it. And he finally said, "Look, you guys better join the bloody East Malvern Club." He was a member of East Malvern. "You better join the club so you can get a licence and go racing properly."
So a few other things happened. I mean, how many races went from Australia to the UK with a letter from the local OJS agent, and were able to walk into a job at the factory, and within a couple of weeks of you being there, you were put onto in the race team area, and so you were learning skills about engines.
True. Yeah.
So that's a pretty amazing sort of situation. And what did you really learn when you were there?
Well, of course, being in a race workshop, producing new motorbikes, new engines, you get to see all the ways of doing things, which really gave me a help later on when I sort of got involved in making stuff at home. I'd seen the way the factory did special race engines, the tolerances they played with, and how to set up things like valve timing and set up crankshafts properly, all the clearances right, and you don't get that in normal workshops. That's they throw engines together. But the race workshop was just top notch, and you learnt the proper way of doing things.
You also spent, I think, about a month with another Norton Manx engine specialist before you came back, which...
Yeah, that was Ray Petty I mentioned, yes.
Earlier, yeah. So that must have been a pretty...
Well, that was very good too.
As well. Yeah. So, a lot of things have happened for Lindsay, and I think what we will do is we'll perhaps wrap up the